There is a place in the galaxy that has seen more bloodshed than any other world bar none. For all know that the wars on Holy Terra make it the most important and blood-soaked planet in the universe. But it was not always so. For once upon a time, there was a world that was the center of an empire built on one thing, and one thing alone: war. And that world is now called Armageddon. It could always be worse. It was what we said all of the time. Well, not all of the time, but often enough. It was our little code sign. We're stuffed. We're utterly buggered. But we're still here, so it could be worse. I've never known it to get better, ever. From my first days to my last. It never goes up. Always down. My own miserable existence proves that, but it could always be worse. It's also now become a bit of a thing, almost a challenge. Can it? Can it really? But fate rises to the challenge. It always, unbelievably, gets worse. I grew up in the Hive, was raised a splitter. We were the local gang, but it was more like a tribe. Like all of the entities the mid-spires and above called gangs. We had our actual gangs, of course, our warriors, of which I became one. But we defended patches of tunnels, and it got brutal every day. Meat raids were the most dangerous, because when an enemy is dead, right? But you have to get them out of there. So you are slow, unless you take a hatchet to the matter, but then you leave a fierce trail. Odor and juice drops. Dangerous in the tunnels. But eventually, it was not just the other communities and gangers we fought, because this was Armageddon. This was the world of war. Orks, greenskins would pour into the tunnels some years, lowered first, then rising. Like they grew in the dark. They came in numbers, but they were stupid. Strong, but stupid. Easy eating. Well, if you got through the initial shock, the first wave was always the worst. Then it happened. Arbites. They came. They locked off the gates. Starved us of air. So many died. But the strong survived. When they came in, we were weak. They took most. Some died resisting. Most knew it was worthless to try in this state. Because we knew they were not here to kill us. Not really. Or they'd have left the air off. They wanted us. Only one use for an organized military group. We were to be Astra Militarum. We were in the guard now. Basic was done in weeks. Uniforms were earned and signed for. Everything was signed for. Most of us just dipped our thumb in the ink and splattered it on the page. We were given the legendary las gun. Trained how to point and fire. Trained in our support equipment. Going outside was dangerous. We listened intently then, I can tell you. And we got armoured vehicles. With more guns. The kind we always dreamed of. But it wasn't much different. We would fight. We would kill. We were just better armed. It could be worse, right? The jungle wars were the answer to that question. Orks, again, but in close proximity. We'd sweep for them in fanned out positions, Others bundled up, those units from higher levels of the hive. We spread out. Because the greenskin amongst you is real bad. So we shimmied up trees, dug in, hid and waited. Sent off a few to bring them in. We gunned them down in their heaps. But if they got past our lines of fire, it got messy. Bayonets are great, but these horrors don't die easily. They take a few down with them unless you are in control. But some waves were so dense, so unending, that they took control. Half our number gone in just 3 months. But it could be worse, right? That was when the reinforcements from off-world ended. Less bodies for the meat grinder. Then we heard that the ships were still docked. Nobody was going anywhere. Then it happened. Hordes of pink and blue things, like rattlings if you'd had exposure and had mind fog, spitting flames and killing all. The red beasts, the sword-wielding horned horrors who required volley fire to even slow down. The huge things of nightmare, twisting reality around them, making walls into water and air into acids, culling entire companies in single encounters. We were in the Steel Legion. It didn't matter. Whoever, whatever, wherever. We fight until we drop, and we never drop alone. I don't know how exactly, but we're still here. So, it could be worse, right? Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the factions, forces, and worlds of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. And today, we shall be discussing one of the best-kept secrets in the galaxy, one of the most hardened and elite fighting forces in the armies of the Imperium of Man, and the history of a world that has seen rivers of blood of many hues shed on its sands. For today, we discuss the Steel Legion, that redoubtable force of human warriors, and we discuss their home, the world of Armageddon. And it is unique in the galaxy, for it is not where it should be, nor is it called what it should be. For once upon a time, the world was somewhere entirely different, and it was called Alano. Now that name may breeze straight over the heads of some, but to those who know, to those who mark it, this one name comes like a thunderbolt, for so much is contained in the simple word, Alano. The world that was the centre of the mightiest empire the Great Crusade would ever meet. The world where the Emperor of Mankind almost lost his life to a single Xenos. The world where history was made and the War Master was anointed. Alano. The planet where destinies are made and shattered. And few other worlds exist or ever have that contain more history, more horror, and more bloodshed than this one place. For if there is one planet in all of the universe that is most likely to be the home of one of the ancient races, it is this. All know where the Eldar lived, where they held their courts and where their horrific hedonism eventually damned them all to hell. The Eye of Terror is where the old Eldar homeworlds were, but the Eldar are not the only race to have survived the war in heaven. The Jakero are near extinct. The Rashan and Kanib minor inconveniences, rarely seen. But there is another race that came out of that war, that most terrible of all confrontations. And they are as multitudinous as the very stars in the galaxy. There can be no doubt that they easily outnumber all other races in the galaxy, bar perhaps the Tyranids, if they finally arrive in full swing. Even more than the humans, who undoubtedly rule the majority of the space in the galaxy, if not the world. More than even the returning legions of the soulless Necrons. More than the Tau Eldar or Krut. or any other Xenos by a country mile. For Alano may be the home world of the most dangerous race that has ever been seen. The race that is built for war, but more than its contemporaries, the species that was built to enjoy it. The Krork were now known as the Orks. And as such, it is no surprise that this world, this lone planet in space, is like a beacon. It draws aggression, ferocity and rage across time and space, it seems. For it has not just been the site of multiple wars against the Orks, but also a hell spot where the border between the real and the warp is so thin that it has been a staging ground for more than one chaos invasion. It is here that Angron walked the ground. It is here that the Imperium's greatest defenders turned on each other. Not during the battle against chaos, but after it. It is almost as if the very planet exudes a malevolence into the universe. But let us now get into the nitty-gritty and get some form to this discourse. The ancient history of Armageddon. 10,000 years ago or more, when the Emperor was whole, when he was able to walk among his children, his Primarchs and his people, even then he was not infallible nor invulnerable. He led his armies across the stars, finding his Primarchs as he went, leading his legions of Space Marines out from Terra. But very early, they identified a huge empire. A massive expanse of space, where every world bent the knee to one overlord. And he was no human, no witch, no sorcerer. For it was a teeming and tumultuous, green-skin empire, ancient unto itself. At first, the Imperium largely went around the Ork Empire, expansion speed being more important than the course it took, and they were right to do so. For as it progressed, the crusade grew in might and power. More Astarte supplicants were recruited from the worlds that were brought back into compliance. More Primarchs were found with each year, themselves being force multipliers of colossal worth. Each army they led being factors above the forces, without one of these demigods of war at the helm. Yet, inevitably, the looming threat of the Ork Empire could not be ignored. The Emperor brought many of his sons together, each bringing their entire legions. It was a massive effort, and some said, the high point of Imperial strength, the zenith of our power in that age. Even so, the Primarchs and the Emperor himself took the field. The forces of the Orks were so fell, so terrible, that even the gene-enhanced armies of the Marines were fought to a standstill. And the Lord of the Orks strode forth and ploughed through the forces of mankind in a direct line for the Emperor. This Ork boss was so potent that he engaged the Emperor and near bested him. It was only the intervention of Horus Lupercal that saved the master of mankind and brought the Ork war boss low. Sidebar. Do always remember that one and all. It was an Ork that nearly killed the Emperor. An Ork. Sidebar over. With the death of their warlord, the Orks broke and scattered and were soon chased and hunted down and culled by the victorious human armies. Yet it was Alano that saw the elevation of the Primarch Horus to War Master, and we all know what happened from there. But it was so important then. This one place was so iconic to the entire age. It represented humanity at its best, able to match and defeat the greatest warrior races of the first ages, but also at our worst. For it was later, on Alano, that Horus was toasted by his traitor brothers and all of their legions before they took their last march towards Terra. We fast forward some 2,000 or 3,000 years, dependent on your perspective. Then the horror began anew. For a new faction of Orks had arisen, one near as powerful as that faced by the Emperor, and it unleashed waves of slaughter on the human race. For in all of the invasion, destruction and battle, few noticed that the Orks' war was very much centered on the capture of one world, Alano. It was here that they fell hardest and reclaimed their world, possibly their birthplace, The power of the Orks Empire was terrifying. They had attack moons that could teleport through the galaxy, one hovering over Holy Terror itself and engaging Dread Phalanx itself. The Imperium and the ascendancy of humanity was almost toppled in this war. So very, very nearly. But Imperial savants eventually located the center of the storm, Alano. So they struck. Leading them was the last Primarch, who had returned and done so seemingly only to meet this threat, for Vulcan himself came back to attack Alano. And it was good that he did, for the leadership of the Orks was near ascension, in my mind anyway. They commanded so many Orks, had so many victories, so much war, so much fighting, that I believe that they were on the verge of returning to their original state, that of being Krork. Yet Vulcan led forces to the world and fought his way to the very palace at its heart. It also saw the first Death Watch kill teams be fielded. Vulcan slew the leader of the Orks, shattering their cohesion, but he paid for it with his life. Although he is a Perpetual, and there is every likelihood that he will rise again elsewhere, he has not done this so far. The Ork world was ordered to be destroyed. Exterminatus was to be enacted on it forthwith. No new Ork empire would arise here in the future, is what the order intended. It was reported to the High Lords of Terror that the planet had been shot into a supergiant blue star. And end to the matter. Alas, the reality was that the leader of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the Fabricator General Kubik, disobeyed out of avarice. For the Mechanicus do not invent, for that would be tech heresy, but they can reverse engineer, they can study archaeotech and xenotech if given the right authority. And this world had a potential treasure trove of Xenos weaponry and tech on it. Thus the Mechanicus stole it instead. I know, that sounds very fantastical, but then how it was done is indeed fantastical. For the Adeptus Mechanicus had been attempting to recreate the mass teleportation that had been used by the Orks in the brutal war, the War of the Beast. Though it was not repeated, to my knowledge, they managed it. They moved Alano. They teleported an entire planet across the galaxy. And so it was that the world appeared in the Armageddon system, for as it had not been properly colonized by the Imperium yet, this was utterly unnoticed by any who were not looking. And in that age of rapid recovery from that terrible war, nobody was watching. Hence was Alano removed from all records, its memory obliterated as thoroughly as the High Lords had believed the world had been, and in its place the name of Armageddon Prime was given. A world that would soon be colonized by humans blissfully unaware of the actual pedigree of the planet they would then invest and infest. The world had already undergone war, the devastation of the parade afterward that required the flattening of an entire continent, then being dragged through space to its current position. It was a hard place to exist, but it was minerally rich, and very soon the hive city cores were scattered across its length and breadth, the teeming metropolises growing from each one, millions of people inside, then rising exponentially. Armageddon then spent an age relatively uneventfully. Relatively. As in it was not the backdrop of a galactic-level struggle, but it was as if the very spite and ire of the Orks had been washed into the bedrock of the world. For most planets that hives have crime, they have gangs of merciless killers roaming the undercities. But on Armageddon, the scale is beyond belief. The attrition should denude the hives by dint of self-destruction, yet, so very much like their cousin species, the heroes here somehow not only survived, but they thrive and multiply. So in the end, are the humans and Orcs so different after all? Are we not a mix of Eldar and Orc, a middle product betwixt extremes? But I digress. The Imperium raised regiment after regiment from the populace, but more than this. They could produce the majority of their own arms and armour. For a planet that was not ostensibly a war or bastion planet, Armageddon was a jewel without compare. Generating chimera transports in their hundreds of thousands, men and women in their millions, Armageddon was a centre of production. Yet the old curse struck, and when the demon Prince Angron tore at the edges of reality, ever looking for a way in, he managed to do so on this world. For the rage and hate of yore would always make the veil weaker around this planet, vulnerable. The First War of Armageddon. And so, Angron tore across Armageddon at the head of a mighty war host he brought from hell. Angron was only stopped by the resilience of the people, slowing down his forces, then the combined power of the Space Wars and the Grey Knights themselves. The Knights fought Angron, and though he killed many, they finally banished him. But here is where the true horror of the area must have affected those doubtless warriors. For the Inquisition and the Grey Knights would have the populace exterminated or mind-wiped, sterilized, to protect them against the threat of further warped taint, to stop them being a living proof of the power that the Imperium so vehemently denied the mere existence to, because they knew of chaos. Yet the Space Wolves, the sons of Rus, were not so accepting. They felt that those who had stood against chaos had weathered the storm and spat in evil's eye. They should be lauded, they should be hailed, they should not be slain like diseased cattle. The Fenrisians were not men of words, but action. And when many attempted to flee on ships, the Inquisition slaughtered them and destroyed their conveyances. Where they could at least. For the ships of the Space Wolves fleet soon engaged them and fought tooth and nail to protect their erstwhile allies in arms. The battles were not short and not uncostly. This period is known, quite rightly, as the months of shame. Months. Eventually, the deadlock was broken by the intervention of an ancient dreadnought of the Space Wolves, and the matter resolved in discussion between leaders. But would it ever have gone to such drastic levels of battle were it not that they fought over Alano? I am not so sure. The Second War of Armageddon. In the year 941 Millennium 41, the lost sons of Alano returned. It was not really long after the horror of the Demon War, whilst they were repairing and rebuilding, that Armageddon was struck again. This time, the tendrils of the Eldar were at play. For Eldred Ulthrin chose one strand of fate and discarded another. He intervened to have a war boss slain, to prevent an attack on his craft world. But this meant that another orc arose in his stead. And this one was Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka, the prophet of Gork and Mork. His head shot half off in a battle. The orc had his mind eviscerated. Yet he survived, and from there on in, he claimed to hear the voices of the gods. Gork, god of brutal cunning, and Mork, god of cunning brutality. And both whispered that he should take this one world, a world held by the Humies, their homeworld, Alano. Thus he rampaged across the stars in his holy quest, his holy war to Armageddon. The fleet he amassed in his tail was the largest seen since the War of the Beast, and it slammed into Armageddon despite having to fight through the Sector Navy and ships of the Black Templars. I will go into more detail on this in the future. Gazgul led millions upon millions of orcs, and they teamed across the planet. They encircled high cities and then sieged them, mostly frontal assaults. But even then, sometimes they were doing things that orcs would not do. They were learning. Their leader was developing. Many Space Marine chapters were present, regiments of Astra Militarum, Adeptus Mechanicus, many Night Houses, and even Titans. The god engines of war were deployed. The tales of this war are many, its heroes more so. Grimaldus was raised as the hero of Hell's Reach Hive, after spirited defense. One that has been brought into amazing clarity by the voice actors and animators of the piece Hell's Reach, which remains one of the best tales of its kind on this platform, links in description. But the most important and dramatic of the moments on that world must surely have been concerning the battle of wits and martial skill between the Ork warlord and a certain Commissar Sebastian Yarrick. The war was won by the Imperium, but at incredible cost. Nor was it done conclusively, for Galsgul was never taken, never defeated, never found. The Third War for Armageddon. A huge fleet of Orks, dwarfing even the original Armada, came out of warp space and ploughed towards Armageddon Prime. Exactly 57 years later, to the day, Galsgul had returned. His vast mobs of Orks landed and began a war even more bitter and fierce than the first. The defenders were more experienced, as some of the veterans of the Second War had survived, Yarrick foremost amongst them. But the cunning of the Ork warboss was enhanced as well. He feinted, led Imperial forces into traps. His ordnance and support were far larger. For the human defenders, it was a living hell, but to the Orks, it was a wonderful time. They did so love the very act of war. But strangely, the populace of the world consistently displayed a willingness to fight tooth and nail. It was not so much an adoration of the Emperor, racial or species loyalty. It was more the fact that when the Orks did make ingress into a hive, finally get past the guard lines, they faced tunnels filled with angry and very well-equipped gangers. The Jews alone were an issue, for they fought like Orks themselves, but with more wiles and local knowledge. So even when the Orks did get to what was supposed to be easily taken squishy Humy holdings, they had the enviable position of being right where they were happiest, in the thick of combat never ending. And the Marines and other elite forces of the Third War were even more numerous. Many Marine chapters arrived to engage the Orks as before. The war was horrific. Though declared a victory, but barely, it was not really over. For the Orks are on the planet, in numbers. There are spores everywhere. They grow in numbers and attack regularly. Nor is this the entirety of it. The drained and blasted world did not gain any respite. Not really. For despite victory over the Orks, matters only got worse. The era Indomitus. The planet of Armageddon is perpetually at war, but, as before, it has shown the weakness of the wall betwixt real space and the domain of horrors, the warp. For when the great grin of Gork tore across the galaxy, the great rift opened from the Eye of Terror by Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade, the world was thrown into turmoil. So thin the veil before, now shredded so finely, the greater demons broke through, and the battles of the Ether erupted into real space. For the human defenders and Ork aggressors were added to by roaming Tzeentchian and Khornate warbands, but these forces did not smash the mortals around them in concert. Perhaps it was meant to be, or perhaps it was not. But as soon as the demons set eyes upon one another, they butchered them as swiftly as they would any human or greenskin. Thus the battles of the demons seemed to extend the great game, the struggle between the powers of chaos, all while the Imperial forces attempted to clear them all out, and the Orks attacked any they felt would provide the most challenging scraps. Alas, this is now how it has been left, to the best of my knowledge. The planet remains to be a key world, and its loss would be a deep blow to the Imperium. Now the era Indomitus has arrived. It may be that enough forces will be sent by the Lord Commander to quell the Chaos invasions, and finally stamp out all resistance and existence of the Orks. But it is not as simple as even that. For the prophet of Gork and Mork, Galsgul Mag Uruk Thraka, has been seen in many parts of the galaxy. He is sent to the furthest reaches of Orkidom. He visits the bosses. and they either follow him or they die. The Prophet is rallying his entire species. And if he can do that, if Galskull can become a boss of bosses, then surely he will return. He will burn all of Armageddon until no human or demon is left to challenge him. He will take back the planet of his people's birth. He will take back Alano. All terrifying, until one sees the caliber of the forces that hold against a rising tide of greenskin and demonic scum. But let us now hear about the Steel Legion. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. An entry from the 8th edition Astra Militarum Codex. To quote, "The Armageddon Steel Legion. The ash wastes of Armageddon are filled with corrosive toxins and industrial pollution. Were a man to breathe the air outside of Armageddon's hives for any extended period, his lungs would quickly rot. Despite this, Armageddon has a massive population and is capable of raising a large number of Imperial Guard regiments. Indeed, at the height of the Second War for Armageddon, more regiments were being raised each year from the population of Armageddon than any other two worlds in the entire Segmentum Solar combined. The people of Armageddon are therefore no strangers to warfare. They give no quarter and expect none in return. Perhaps the most renowned of Armageddon's soldiery are the Steel Legion mechanized infantry regiments. While it is difficult for most Imperial commanders and planetary governors to obtain and maintain enough of the vehicles needed for such formations, Armageddon has produced hundreds of these swift-moving regiments. The Hive world is one of the chief manufacturing plants for chimeras, producing countless numbers for use across the Imperium. The extremely industrialized nature of Armageddon means that a far higher proportion of its regiments are mechanized infantry. It is for this reason that these mobile regiments were given their moniker Steel Legion. Fully mobile, the Chimera-mounted infantry squadrons are capable of overrunning enemy positions with large convoys before the infantry dismount to finish them off. All soldiers within the Steel Legion wear protective clothing such as trench coats, gloves and visors, so as to minimize the exposure to their world's polluted atmosphere. Most notably, every trooper carries a rebreather, or gas mask, unit capable of filtering out the worst of the airborne poisons. The rebreathers of senior officers are often fashioned in the visage of a grinning skull in an attempt to unnerve the superstitious Orks that have ravaged their war-torn world in recent years. The warriors of Armageddon reserve a particular hatred for the Orks, who in their lust for war have smashed whole hive cities asunder, and whose presence continues to plague the planet. Many of the Steel Legion troopers are drafted from amongst the crammed populations of Armageddon's massive hive cities, where only the ruthless survive the ceaseless and brutal gang wars. Many of the Armageddon Underhive's most notorious gangs are conscripted directly into the Imperial Guard, without the need for any additional training, their ruthless skills proving more than adequate. All regiments drawn from Armageddon reap the spoils of the planet's enormous manufactorums, which work ceaselessly to produce the vast quantities of armaments needed to equip so many soldiers. The constant demand for more material has transformed Armageddon into an unequaled industrial behemoth. Not only are lasguns, vehicles, and war machines produced at an incredible rate, but they are of exemplary quality, honed to perfection after millions of iterations. In the ongoing war for Armageddon, native regiments have been deployed in almost every major battle against the returning greenskin hordes. None have been more grueling than the siege of Hive Acheron, where Imperial forces, Orks, and now demons are locked in a maelstrom of bloodshed and destruction as they fight for control of Armageddon's primary hive. Millions from each side crowd the ash wastes around the planet's capital, supported by armoured columns as well as towering gargants and titans. An unending rain of explosive shells falls from on high, with the artillery targets shifting as control of the gun emplacements change hands. Deep within Acheron itself, covert kill teams traverse the vast lattice of promethium pipes that riddles the hives, hoping to circumvent the enemy's defences. Hundreds of Armageddon infantry, armoured and artillery regiments have taken part in this particular siege, and their tenacity and expertise at fighting in the ash wastes has seen them fare better than many other Imperial forces. In fact, the mechanized regiments of the Steel Legion have had more guardsmen survive their first hour of combat at Hive Acheron than any other of Armageddon's regiments. The Steel Legion takes special care to protect their mighty banners, each one hung with trophies of honour, and no small amount of orc kill markers. These banners are coated with highly resistant materials in an attempt to preserve them from the wasteland's acidic decay. And so specialized and prolific are the factorums of this world that they even have their own patterns to some production lines. Armageddon pattern technology. Armageddon is known to produce its own patterns of numerous weapons and vehicles, such as the M40 Armageddon pattern autogun and the Armageddon pattern Basilisk, Sentinel Combat Walker, and Medusa. One of the defining characteristics of Armageddon pattern vehicles is that they are environmentally sealed, a necessity for fighting on Armageddon and other hive worlds like it in order to protect a vehicle's occupants from the corrosive effects of the planet's ash wastes. End quote. Now some may draw immediate parity between the Steel Legion and the regiments hailing from Krieg, the long coats, rebreathers or gas masks that make them so striking. But where the warriors of Krieg are fanatics of the deepest and most aggressive fervour, the Steel Legion are not. The Steel Legion are not mad zealots who throw themselves at the enemy with the hopes of redemption. They are human warriors who have been honed and forged in the fires of gang conflict, the horrors of tunnel warfare. They fight to survive, and are as hardy as any human can get without being gene-enhanced. Theirs is the discipline required to be a part of a unit that must win or die. Surrender is never and has never been an option to them. Not in their gang strifes, not in their battles with Xenos or Demon. They are tight-knit groups that have been fighting shoulder to shoulder for decades, since birth, as described in my wee tale at the beginning of this entry. Often, their gangs taken as a whole. They are then trained to use the better weaponry of the Astra Militarum, the Guard, but this takes a much shorter time than any other recruits in the galaxy. For it is only really the upgrade of weaponry and equipment, and then knowing the chain of command and how to act. For they have all the combat experience they require before ere they don their uniform. The Steel Legion is an oddity, as it contains mixed arm units, which is strictly against the rules of the Guard, which I have discussed at length previously. But it does make them a much more potent force because of it. But now, let us sum up. Most look to the war in Octarius and see a hell of unimaginable depth. For if either Ork or Tyranid finally win out, that which comes out of that war will be unstoppable. Some look to Nachmund and its reaches, and see war descending into attrition, the likes of which could drain entire sectors of their population, thrown onto the pyre of war. Yet to me, one of the most interesting places in the galaxy, and the most dangerous war zones, is this. It is Armageddon. For the Orks have always come back here, have always tried to return to their world of birth, have always tried to reconnect with that which is hidden here. What secrets lie unfound and unknown under the troubled surface of Armageddon? What ancient power still remains there to attract the race of the Orks again and again? Why do they keep coming back? And I for one hope that the Steel Legion and all of the many Marines, Sisters of Battle, Mechanicus, Knights and Titans that hold this ground for humanity never ever find out. Because it could be as bad for humanity as that one box that should never have been opened. Is Alano, Armageddon, the Pandora's box that the Orks will open and bring woe to all of humanity, and then the galaxy entire. Let us hope, for the Imperium's sake, that they never, ever find out. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to Armageddon and the Steel Legion. If so, then do please consider liking and subscribing. If you do, then hit the notifications button, as I would not want you to miss out. We now have affiliate links, so if you are intending to increase your armies, then do avail yourself of a healthy discount and help out the channel at the same time. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.